collect any money in here. This is the Children and Youth Committee. We don't collect money in here. You'll learn that. This is the Poor Committee.
We need to, though.
All right.
I'm talking about we need to collect some from the state.
Ladies and gentlemen, Children and Youth will come to order, and I will ask the Secretary, Buddy Harden, to give our invocation. If we can get our staff folks to kind of come to order here.
All right, join me in prayer, please. Our Father, we come together in prayer, praise your holy name. Father, we thank you for the many blessings that you bestow on us. Lord, we pray that you would give us the wisdom to know your will in all our considerations and the courage to follow that will so that we will do what is pleasing in your sight for our state and our citizens. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, Buddy. For those of y'all that don't know, we have a special guest today, and it is our new child advocate, who is a personal friend of mine from my home county of Cobb. And I would ask y'all. Thank you. Okay, now let's see. Dr. Shell. Oh, okay. Well, it's our pleasure today to have our new Director of Behavioral Health to come and present to us today. For the committee's information, he is a psychiatrist, so be careful what you say. And he is going to talk about all aspects of behavioral and mental health for the children of the state of Georgia. And without further ado, we'll let Dr. Shelp talk to us about that. Dr. Shelp. I'm going to turn mine off, right?
All right. Excuse me, Mike.
Bottle of water?
Well, it might not hurt. I have a bottle of water. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about particularly children's services because there's been much said about the recent settlement with the Department of Justice around behavioral health and developmental disabilities. And one important consideration in thinking about this settlement is what the settlement does not speak to. The settlement speaks primarily to adult mental health services and developmental disabilities as they relate to institutional care and providing community services for people to live in the community, both with developmental disabilities and mental illness. But the Department of Justice was not concerned or interested in two large areas. One is forensic mental health, which I won't speak any more about right now, and children and adolescents. And I'm not sure why that was, but be that as it may, you don't invite your adversary to expand their scope of attack. So we sort of left it the way it was, and children and adolescents are of particular concern because they are served in probably the most diverse array of services and service systems. We have, I can think at least of half a dozen different payer sources for children's services within our own state agencies. Medicaid has 3 CMOs or managed care organizations. Each of these have their own behavioral health subsidiaries that manage children's services. DFACS also has Medicaid on a fee-for-service basis for children that are under state custody. And there are, I believe, some children's services that fall out in a fee-for-service manner that are provided for by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. Additionally, the Department of Juvenile Justice has a large mental health need itself that it meets separately. Department of Education is also involved in children's services. So just off the top of one's head, you can see that a child may move about within half a dozen different arenas. And there is not currently an overarching strategy as to how we might best address children's services, either in terms of prevention or ongoing services. So that's just the backdrop against which we begin to talk about what we are doing in different areas. In fairness, I won't try to speak to other agencies. Juvenile justice, DFACS, Medicaid all have their own commissioners and their own organizations, and we are working, I think, in a new spirit of cooperation. We are meeting regularly with these other commissioners, both in our coordinating council, but also in on a smaller venue between Commissioners Cook and Reese at DCH and DHS to look at overlapping areas, and one of the big ones is child and adolescent services. And when we think about children and adolescent services, there's again an array of service needs. Mental health is, of course, one area, but the developmental disabilities and addictions is a large area of concern, because prevention and addiction services are, I think, most crucial in the child and adolescent years if we are going to stem the tide of drug-related crimes, as well as the cost on our general treasury, as the governor has spoken to. So with these things in mind, I've really asked some of the folks in the department to just speak very briefly in a couple of minutes to you about some of these various areas. And I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves. But we'll start with Monica Parker, who will begin talking about children's services in our mental health area. And if you could just speak for a few minutes, I think it would be helpful.
Good afternoon. I'm the new Child and Adolescent Director for DBHDD, and I'm glad to have this opportunity because I've heard said several times that because of the DOJ settlement that the kids were being left out. And I was like, they must not know that I'm in this position now. I have worked every position in child and adolescent mental health in the community. Most recently, I come out of Cobb County. Tasha Citron says hello, by the way. And I very much so understand the issues that we have facing in terms of the infrastructure for child and adolescent mental health needs in this state. As Dr. Shep has already alluded to, our system is fragmented. I understand that from the policy and administrative side, but also from the provider side. So I know what it feels like, both sides, as well as from the client and the child's perspective. So our mission, since I've been in place, which has been 3 months, is my anniversary tomorrow, and we have worked very aggressively to try to do two things twofold. One is to address the quality of the services that are provided to our families and to our kids in the state right now. Better oversight of the actual providers that are serving our kids, clear outcome measures. What is it? How do we know that our kids are getting better? A lot of times we have knee-jerk or band-aid reactions to situations or crises. I want us to be able to move in a direction where we make choices based on outcomes and real data. I want to know that this actually keeps the kid with their family, keeps the child from escalating in terms of their symptoms and their treatment, that they're actually able to get better. So that's kind of mission number one, improving the quality of the services that we offer to the kids in this state. So even though the system is fragmented, that's not an excuse to try to do some things right now to still make access and quality better. Hopefully, long term, we're able to address the fragmentation because, unfortunately, children are probably the most vulnerable in terms of the system because of all the components that they have and the different people who have to interface with them. So hopefully, long term, that is something I'm hoping for, that we are able to get into a system that makes a little bit more logical sense in terms of access and treatment for the kids that we serve.
Question.
Yes.
Describe to the committee some of the services that you provide and how that interacts in each of their communities.
Sure.
I'll start with mine. We have a residential facility in Cobb that serves emotionally disturbed children on a residential unit. It's called Devereaux, and right now they're in jeopardy of being cut tremendously in the budgetary process, to the point that these children will have nowhere else to go. So I know we're left out of the settlement for children and adolescents, but that's just one example of something that I think this committee really needs to be aware of. Yes, we're fragmented, but we need to get a handle on this as representatives. So if you could just speak to some of these issues.
Sure. Warren. Okay. Well, in terms of the services that we provide your basic outpatient package arena, which includes individual counseling, family therapy, counseling services, group services, clinical assessments. So that basic kind of treatment package, alluding to some of the issues Representative Manning was talking about. We also have what we call PRTF services, which is an acronym for Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facilities. There are a few across the state. We no longer hospitalize kids in the state. If that's not common knowledge, they don't go to like a Georgia regional. And so a couple of years ago, these facilities were not necessarily created because they were there, but transitioned from something else to be able to meet that high-end group of kids that have very significant mental health behaviors or mental health issues. Devereaux is one of those facilities. We also have 4 crisis stabilization programs. Those are short-term, not hospital level, but short-term stabilization for a kid that is in a mental health crisis. And then we offer something else that is a little bit newer, or at least over the last couple of years, which is kind of an alternative to having a child removed from the home. So when I talked about the psychiatric residential treatment facilities, we now have, through funding from Centers for Medicaid, the opportunity for a family to elect to keep their child in the home versus going into a facility. And we call that a CBAY waiver. That's an acronym for Community-Based Alternatives for Youth. I have no idea how I remember all this stuff in my head.
You can imagine trying to get them to understand.
I know. I'm trying to be acronym free. So, but in any event, what that essentially means is if I'm a parent and I have a child with significant mental health issues, they meet medical necessity to go into a treatment outside of their home, not for an extensive period of time. Typically, maybe 90 days is should be an average length of stay. I may decide, you know what? I don't want that to happen. I don't want my child to go into any facility. If you can wrap additional services around me through a systems of care approach. Systems of care basically says we wrap around a lot of resources, a lot of supports, and coordinate treatment. Remember when I talked about the different hands that touch kids? So if I'm a parent and I have this child, they may have issues at the school, they may have issues with DFACS, they may have issues with Department of Juvenile Justice, who knows? So somebody has to play traffic cop to that system to make it work. So make the people talk to each other. It seems novel, right? But it doesn't happen all the time. So CBAY allows for that coordination to happen. So we're hoping, this is a demonstration grant, and we're hoping that this is something that will stay around so that we can keep families intact, keep kids with their families, which is where they ultimately get better.
Other members of the committee have questions or comments?
Okay, you are.
Robert Bell will talk to us about developmental disabilities and children's services.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am the Family Supports and Service Administrator for the Division of Developmental Disabilities. We provide supports to children in a number of ways, and I mentioned several of them. First of all, I want to mention the Marcus Autism Center, which is right here in Atlanta, and it serves, let me get the number right, 1,123 people, the bulk of those being people under 21. And the service they provide, as the name implies, is for people with autism, but they also serve children with fetal alcohol syndrome, and it's paid for through state funds as well as Medicaid funds. And much of the services are provided there, but they also provide services in the community, in the homes, and also at the schools. Additionally, the Matthew Reardon Center in Savannah provides state contract-funded services to children with behavioral disabilities, to 109 children. And these are primarily in the southeastern area of the state, for behavioral supports, and this is 100% state funded. A large component of the services that we provide to children are family support services, and family support services are specific, focused services that can be in a broad-based category because it's state funded, so it's not tied down to the levels of regulation that Medicaid might would apply, but it can be specific to the children's needs or to the family support structure. The purpose of family supports is to prevent institutionalization as well as to keep Georgia families together. It's not 100% focused on children, so it can be any family member, but when we look over the numbers, probably 75% of the family supports that are given out are to people under 21, and there are around 2,000 as of a couple days ago. It was 1,999, so that's a broad-based number of people who are receiving supports through family supports. And it can be things like goods and services like diapers, it can be nutritional supplements, it can be services in the home such as personal supports in the home to help people with their activities of daily living, or other training type activities. So it can really be pretty broad-based, and it can be comprehensive. And maybe the most important, of course, is the DD waiver, and there's two waivers here in Georgia for developmental disabilities. That'd be the NOW waiver, the new options waiver, as well as the COMP waiver, the comprehensive waiver. The new option waiver is looked at more as lesser levels of funding for supports that people are receiving in the home, and the comprehensive waiver are much more extensive supports. It's for people who need more extensive supports in the home, or potentially in a host home if somebody is not living in their own home. And the number of people that are receiving those services in the new opportunity waiver, the least costly or lesser costly waiver, there's 461 individuals. In the comprehensive waiver, there's 308 people receiving that waiver. And of course, those are based on most in need. And right now we have about 10,000 people in waiver services. In the COMP, there's around 5,000. In the new opportunities waiver, there's around 5,000. So we are serving Georgia's children in a broad array of areas. We also help other people that support children, such as the school system and others, through case management efforts of support coordinators and others, to make sure that other support systems are doing their job as we also try and help children here in Georgia.
Next question.
Yes.
When you say waiver services, what does that mean? What are we talking about when you say waiver services?
Waiver services are a type of services that are used in lieu of institutional set levels of care. So these are services that are community-based and are allowed to allow a person to live at home or in a home of their choosing. Children, of course, the preference is that they stay with their family. So waiver service means it waives the need for institutional care and allows for a level of care so somebody can be in a community and home-based setting.
So let me understand, there are no hospital-based services at all in the state?
There are no admissions. There are very few people under 21 who are being moved out under the settlement agreement. Most of these are medically fragile, and it's been a challenge to find a level of support so that they can live safely, but it's single-digit number of people. So there's no institutional setting for all practical purposes.
So, and you said there are 10,000 children being served?
No, there's 10,000 people on DD waiver services, adults and children, and the number of children being served are 769.
Is that all?
That's all. And the primary reason for this is most of the services come from family support structure through the school, because the school will provide a number of support services till age 21, at which time, ideally, we would like to have DD waiver services pick up and support in the form of supportive employment, pre-vocational services, and other services that the individual needs to live successfully in the community.
So how does somebody access all these different services?
The primary way that these services are accessed is if a person feels a family member or if they feel they have a disability, they contact the regional office. And the regional office does a screening for DD eligibility. And if people meet DD eligibility, then they're put on a planning list, at which point we start advocating for services.
That's not the waiting list, right? That's the
That
planning list?
it is the waiting list. We call it the planning list, as it sounds better, because we are planning to get them into waiver services.
Y'all swap these words out every so often, and sometimes I don't know whether I'm waiting or if I'm planning. Sometimes you can't tell.
The family's waiting and we're planning.
Well, are we about to reach the end of the planning list?
We have
We moved everybody out, almost out of the hospital, right? Or a large number.
a large number has been moved out of the hospital, but there are over 6,000 people on the planning list who would love to have waiver services. And
So I would like you to tell us about it. How do you attrition those people off?
well, you know, the DD waiver services are based on a Medicaid-funded waiver, but state funds have to support the balance. And so it's in a time when there are limited resources and pushes on the budget in a number of areas, we are supporting every person that we have been allowed to fund. We are receiving new funded based on the settlement agreement, and those people most in need and most at threat of institutionalization will receive those waiver funds. But until we can fund the rest of them right now, what we are doing is we are trying to access any other services that we can. That means we make sure people are on the state plan. We make sure that they're getting Social Security benefits. We connect them with natural supports as is available. And so we do everything that we can to support the family structure while we're awaiting funding for DD waiver services.
Yes, sir. Representative Tucker.
Been my experience.
You'll have to speak up because they can't hear you.
Been my experience of having chaired the board of a adolescent psychiatric hospital, that there are a lot of youth in the state, adolescents, who desperately need an institutional setting because they're coming from a dysfunctional family, and probably many of the members of that family need to be in an institution themselves. How are we meeting the needs of those young people?
That's an interesting question, and I don't know that I'm the one that's best trained to answer that question.
Let me speak
defer
to that
to-
a little bit. Institutional care for children and adolescents, I'll say, is controversial. And speaking as a member of the board of a hospital for adolescents, that implies one perspective. The perspective that is, I would say, gaining majority in mental health and in psychiatry is really away from institutional care as much as possible for all parties, but particularly for children and adolescents, and would actually say that if a child is in a highly dysfunctional family, what they need is not really institutional care. They need a functional family. So taking someone out of a dysfunctional family into an institution is not the exchange that would be most beneficial. That said, there are often issues of a very acute, very highly physically active times where someone needs safety that might require a setting that has 4 walls and a door. But that can't be allowed to become an institution. It can't be allowed to become a long-term strategy. That needs to be brief. I'd also say that people in general, and children and adolescents in particular, rise to the expectations that are put on them. So if we expect unruly behavior and out-of-control behavior, we will have that expectation satisfied. Now, how do we communicate that expectation? We don't go in front of the adolescent and say, I expect you to misbehave and act wild and uncontrolled. Of course we don't. But we communicate it through the manner in which we attempt to help them. And if we attempt to help them by putting them in an institution and by putting them in a seclusion room or somewhere else, then we are communicating through those settings a kind of expectation that they will rise to meet. So currently we do have crisis stabilization units, which are very hospital-like, but they're community operated for children and adolescents that provide 24/7 care, supervised by a physician with nurses and social workers and the usual array of service providers, and we have those available that we fund directly. We have the psychiatric residential treatment programs that have been spoken about. And under Medicaid and under other private insurance and whatnot, there are still settings for hospital level of care, but the emphasis is clearly on doing something to intervene with families. The cost of institutional care, particularly for an adolescent, is $150,000 a year minimum in an institution. That is an amazing amount of money. Placing a fraction of that money in the hands of a functional adult with that child will not only be more efficient, more less costly, it will actually be more effective in terms of the child's own hope for the future. So this is a topic around which I'm sure there's controversy or differences of opinions that I'm sure run very passionately. But that's really where trends have been going and where I think they're going to continue to go.
I understand the trends and the philosophy, and I appreciate that. But you have to admit, I would think, that there are these acute dysfunctional situations where the only immediate and near-term solution, regardless of the expense, is to be put in a setting away from their nuclear family. Unfortunately, that's the case. My concern has been that we have put a burden on some of these facilities that the period of time that they're allowed to be there is so short, you really can't affect much stabilization. And for some youngsters, it becomes almost like a revolving door. It takes more than 10 days or 30 days sometimes, because, I mean, these are very acute cases, and you know them better than I do. Mm-hmm. And I'm just concerned that we're so focused on community-based services, and I'm for that. Mm-hmm. Although the history of our state in that regard has not been very good in terms of funding community-based services for whatever population we're talking about. So I hope we don't get so restricted that we can't at least provide emergency care of enough duration that it really stabilizes that youngster to the point that they can go into some other community or family situation. And I know it's very expensive. Mm-hmm. I know it's very expensive.
Well, I would first make clear that our hearts are in the same place. We fundamentally want to take care of children and adolescents. So what we're discussing is really the how-to to that, and not that we're trying to short anyone one way or the other. With that proviso, I would challenge whether or not someone goes back to a facility because that facility failed initially. I think they go back to the facility because the community continues to fail. Or another way of looking at it, if they in fact go back because the facility originally failed, then why continue to do the same thing and expect a different result? The notion, either way, the notion that the facility needs more time to do this, in a different life, became first involved in these long-term psychiatric residential treatment places where the lengths of stay were measured in years. And the discharge plan essentially was that the patient would reach age 18. Mm-hmm. And then the individual goes from having several years in a 24/7 environment with surrounded by professionals ready to respond to every movement left or right. They go from that environment to the street. That to me was unconscionable. That bordered on criminal.
I don't want to occupy the committee's time. I understand that, but my point is,
you're on the right.
My point is that for the secondary community setting, whatever that might be, is that our initial response is of such short duration. You don't really give that child a chance, or the adolescent psychiatric facility a chance to really stabilize that kid. It may take 90 days. I'm not advocating years, but it may take more time than they're being given for them to be successful and for the secondary setting, whatever that might be, to be successful, so that they don't wind back up in one of these facilities. But I'll start with that.
I'd be glad to talk, offline, one-on-one with anyone about this.
I think this is a real problem, and we've got something we're going to take up in a little while, hopefully, that we'll all have to weigh in on a little bit. It goes to the same thing, because we've seen sometimes in some other agencies the diversion or the other parts of it, allow children to get pushed through the cracks when they don't necessarily need to be. They are children. They're not adults. I'll let you.
Sure. Well, the last area is not last in priority. All these areas, I think, are of equivalent priority. But the area of addictions and substance use and abuse, I think, is profoundly important when we're talking about children, and has a great deal of effect. And do we have Yomi? Oh, here he is. Is it Makanjuola? Is that good? Okay, good. And I'm going to let him speak to some of our services for children and adolescents in the areas of addictive diseases. Go ahead, Yomi.
Madam Chairperson, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Yomi Makanjuola. I'm a certified addiction counselor, and I've been working for the state of Georgia now for over 20 years. 15 years of that was in different treatment program out in the community. So I oversee the substance abuse treatment program for adolescents at this point in time. Right now, in lieu of the last discussion that was going on, right now we have two what we call intensive residential treatment program for adolescents in the state of Georgia. One is located in the metro area, the other one is in South Georgia. These are the program that is for long-term, recovery process for adolescents. The reason being that most of these kids, they've been in the juvenile, justice, and some of them, the home environment or community is not suitable, that they're going in and out. So, that is one of the area that this particular program focuses on. Then, aside from those two intensive residential, we have 4 of what we call group homes. These are less intense, that is based and is community based, so it's a short term duration, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. In this program, the kids were able to go out and work and go to school. It's a 24-hour supervision by the professionals. So, those are located in some of the across the state as well. But the jewel of the division of addictive diseases right now was started about 3 years ago, is what we call Clubhouse Recovery Support Center. This is a program that was initiated, is less intensive, is for mainly what I would refer to for kids that need a little bit of oil change, and then how to maintain, making sure that they keep the engine running in terms of behavior and thinking, in the sense that these are the kids who just use drug occasionally, or they've been in problem with school. This clubhouse is mainly open, after hours. It's located, we have 12 now across the state. It's primarily funded by the, federal government grants. These are the programs that, we establish it. Each community that have this program, they tailor-made it based on their community need. So this is a program that is, when we say support recovery, it's not an intensive treatment program. It's where kids, during the duration of hours, where they're vulnerable to go out and get involved with drug using or gang activity. This is a place where they can come. Not only that they will get a professional help, they get, it's involved in a game. They play games, they do homework, they have access to computer, all kind of things that a lot of kids who don't involve in drug, what we call social activity, that take for granted. This is what this clubhouse program provide for those kids with substance abuse, because the fact of the matter is that when kids are engaged in drug and alcohol use, they seem not to belong into any kind of a social environment where drug or alcohol is not being involved. But this clubhouse provide that safe haven for them. Most of those clubhouses have their own hours. They open mostly on weekend and during the week, in the evening time, where they get different aspects, job coaching, everything that the kids need, to survive and be a functional member of the community. So, and in fact, this is one of the programs that the federal government is really, talking to us about, and the Center for Substance Abuse and Treatment in D.C., they've already, involved with us trying to get up, because other states, they're trying to look and see how we get this going in Georgia. It's not enough, because when I say we only have 12, all over the state, and mind you, we're, in the state of Georgia, we have 159 counties. We get calls every day about people who wants to have that clubhouse in their area, but, the funding is not there. So, and that is some of those stuff that we just have for the, adolescent, in terms of addictive diseases.
And they call that the clubhouse?
It's a clubhouse recovery support.
Where are they located? Does anybody in the committee have one in their area?
You have one. There's one in
Where there, Cobb has one, Douglas has one.
Where is it?
the one in Cobb. I opened the one in Cobb and in Douglas. The one in Cobb is it's near the square. So it's like you're going into the Marietta Square. It's on Atlanta Road. It's in a house. So, and then the other one is off of Thornton Road in Douglas.
This is a program that you will not know it's a program, because it's it's built in the community. It's most of those sites they have a whole house in the community that because of the family environment of what is involved in that program, family can come get help with any kind of support that they need. So it's when we say community support recovery program, it's not a treatment program that is obvious to people that, oh, this is a drug and alcohol treatment. This is a place, more of a recreational area for youth who already having problem with drug, and they have some of them on probation, some of them have been suspended from school, but in this environment give them the tools. Most of the approach that is used in those treatment program is what we call evidence-based practice, which is what is being sanctioned as being appropriate for use. This is an environment where kids are allowed to talk about what they like about drug, and from there they themselves can then talk about the downsides of it in order to get them to start thinking about the do's and don'ts of drug
Is it
use.
like AA or something?
No, it's not. It's not AA. But it's more like it's a social club. So I don't want to use that AA.
You don't join, I'm sure.
Well, you don't. Well, you join. The criteria to be a member is that you have to be in recovery or have problem with drug or alcohol. So that is.
So you don't do anything for the physical dependency. You are strictly there to help them recover after the physical dependency is somewhat overcome? Or?
We have those that in those clubhouse, they are component of a treatment program where they deal with physical dependency.
Okay.
So this is a step down of where they can then learn how to socialize, so that when they go back into the community, then what other, the activity that the youth engage in is not going to be, some sort of headache for them, trying to think that, I can go and watch football without drinking or smoking a little weed, or I can go to a dance, without. So all those are the things that, we teach them, the skill to be functional in the community without the use of drug and alcohol. So those clubhouses are component of a treatment where they already get the withdrawal or this.
How many kids are served in one of these clubhouses?
It varies, depends from, on average, each clubhouse, per their contract, will require that at least they have 30 kids served, per month. So, it varies in the last, 3 years that it's been in existence. So the number varies because the more people, the community, understand what is going on, then the more they're trying to get involved.
How long can you be in this program?
There's no time limit. The beauty of it is that, if somebody finished the program, they can come back because, it's ongoing support in the community. So it's an area where kids can come anytime they want when they feel, yes.
How much do they cost?
Well, right now, like I said, it's funded by the, grant. So it's not costing, the family or the kids, anything. So everything is being paid for by the grant from the federal government.
So it's kind of like Hope? Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody on the committee? Yes.
Yeah.
Representative Burke.
No, you go.
What's the age group for this program that you're talking about?
Most of the program we have is the age group is from 13 years to 17.
In our area, not to be specific on the areas, but in our area in Richmond County, and I'll just speak on that area, we do not have a child adolescent substance abuse that I know of. Matter of fact, I think some of the funding was taken away through Serenity. So these clubhouses, where else are they located throughout the state outside of the metro?
Right now, most of those, clubhouses, I have a list there which I can, share with you. Most of them, like I said, they are attached to different, programs. So those 12 programs that we have now, they are under Community Service Board. So where there is a Community Service Board, center, those community service boards.
Okay.
These are the, service boards.
We have a community service board there.
Yeah. So not all the, states, our county have it yet, because each county, the program, individual have to meet specific, criteria.
So is this a new program? How long has it been in effect?
We started the pilot of it in 2008. So, it's new. Really, most of it doesn't really take place until the end of 2009. So this program is brand new, so to say.
So they are not outside of this metro area there?
No, they are outside where, there, if I can just give you a brief rundown of where we have some. We have one in Gainesville, North Cross, Marietta, Douglas County. We have in Fulton. We have one in Chatham County, that is in Savannah. And we have Floyd County and Gordon County. We have one in Muskogee, and then we have one in Valdosta. So the one in Statesboro, as a matter of fact, I will be there. They're just doing their open house this Friday that I'll be going down there. So those are the areas that we have this clubhouse as of now.
Questions, comments?
I would just add a little bit to that. The Norcross Clubhouse is really a Latino. It's not connected to a community service board. It's really run by a private nonprofit provider, Pierluigi Mancini, and its focus is on the Latino community. So it's bilingual, predominantly Spanish-speaking. And I visited there personally myself on a number of occasions. And I've been impressed with the program in as much as it addresses directly the substance abuse, addiction, drug use, alcohol issues, but it does it in an adolescent context which incorporates other positive activities that are sometimes educational. They have tutors there helping them get through school. They have dances. They have a dance group that actually performs often at Red Ribbon Day, and here as performed here at the Capitol. And so it acknowledges that you have to treat these things in a context. It's not like having strep throat where you just have to do one thing, take this pill and avoid contact with other people. Substance abuse in children and adolescents and others happens in a context. And you've got to address that context. And sometimes it's dysfunctional families, sometimes it's all kinds of things. But the clubhouse model allows for a more open-ended involvement at really relatively low cost to on a per member basis, per adolescent or per child basis. And so we're looking forward to seeing this expand really across the state, and would hope that all community service boards at a minimum would be considering this, and beyond that, that private providers as well would step forward, and become part of this. But these are the array of services, and I know as I listen to my own folks present here, the feeling that comes over me is that we have solutions, we have programs and treatments, and they have track records of being effective. The one piece I forgot to mention is that within these clubhouses, one of them that I visited, some of the what we call epiphenomenon, or things that happen alongside of a problem. Problems foster other problems, and one of them is teen pregnancy. And in one of the other clubhouses that I visited, their teen pregnancy rate had really dropped to 0, and they were affecting positive change across a spectrum. So we have programs that actually have results, but as you can feel, the numbers are not adequate. We're taking care of we're treating maybe 400 kids in these clubhouses. We probably need to be treating 40,000. And so that gap, has to be closed. But that's our overview.
Questions, if you would. Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Dr. Hill. I'm always concerned about the funding and how the effects that we take on the state level is going to trickle down and will affect some of the issues that you have brought up for us today. In light of some of the recommended funding cuts that we're looking at for 2012, and your staff has given us a lot of information, do you have an idea or an overview about where you see some of those particular cuts either harming your programs, because they're also happening on the federal level simultaneously?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have, for the federal, especially in addictions, much of our programming is paid for by federal grants, but they have a provision for maintenance of effort. So there is a state contribution that is very similar to the Medicaid match. If you fail to maintain that effort, then the feds will step back from their portion, and since they represent such a disproportionate share, you really see big losses for even small incremental cuts on the state side. And in an effort to maximize our portion of the federal dollars, we have been talking with DFACs and with DCH about how to optimize all of our resources. But I honestly have not been able to pay as much attention to what's happening across other areas as I would like to. We are still in the process of building this department relatively new, and we have, as you can see, our hands full trying to cover those things. But I think the point you're making is that impact on other agencies certainly has spillover, if not direct, indirect, so that what you take away from one area will push the need into another area. But I don't know specifics. I'm sure we could get back to you on that, because I've got individuals who are closer to their programs and how they're affected, and that I think is a good project we can put together fairly quickly. I see nodding heads, so it won't be a problem.
Dr. Shep, we've got one from Josh Park, and then we've got a little housekeeping, a couple of little housekeeping things.
I have two, if I may. Thank you, Madam Chair. One is, are there any partnerships with churches with these clubhouses? And secondly is, and I don't know if this pertains to here, but Donna Sheldon authored a bill on accounts for developmental disabilities account. Does that, do you guys, is there anything you can shed on that? And does that pertain to the youth?
The first question about the faith community, I don't know if we have any providers that are linked to churches.
Not right now. We're looking into, because that is going to, to open it to the private provider is going to require RFP. So we're looking into, that area, how to engage, the private and, our faith-based community.
Yeah. And then the question about the legislation, are we aware of this other bill? Consuelo here? Do we know about this?
We're doing it right now. So yes, that was something that she brought last year. It's come back to the passed last year, and it's back again this year. So folks in the developmental disabilities are reviewing the legislation.
Do you know what the gist of it was?
From what I understand, they're trying to create expenditure accounts for individuals with developmental disabilities, so that those individuals can draw down some of those funds that have been set in those expenditure accounts to provide for care and services.
How would that be different from the waiver program? Okay. We'd have to research that more. Fundamentally, developmental disabilities is paid for through Medicaid waivers, and those are fairly flexible. Now, I imagine there may be some other needs that don't get covered, but in fairness, we would need to look at the bill more thoroughly, and I think it's just come to our awareness.
Okay.
I think what we'll do now is thank Dr. Shep for coming and ask him if he would then come back again a little bit later. This is a very new agency, and there's lots to learn about it, and as you can tell, there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions. Two quick little housekeeping measures for us. You have in your folder kind of a mustard colored looking thing. Whoa, man. This is your invitation to the probably the one dinner that we go to that is universal with the House and Senate and all those associated committees. So this is on March the 9th, and I hope you will RSVP to Buck and let him know your attendance level, because they do have to have a head count, and you're certainly invited to come. The other thing is the AJC article. I'm sure you all have been having calls about the 4 children that were killed or were murdered or something, and our defects, they weren't under state custody, but they had reason to have been called on several occasions, and so we want to probably had an ad hoc committee that I'm going to ask Representative Hardin to chair to discuss this issue. If you are on his subcommittee, he will be calling a meeting about this to discuss it. All committee members can have input, so feel free to give Representative Hardin your ideas and thoughts and attend the meeting if you want to. But we really need to respond to this as a committee as to what we think needs to happen here and how it needs to be handled, because it is something that involves child fatalities. So that's about all I have for today. If I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, see you next Tuesday.